Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As I've been listening to the testimony and the questions, it strikes me that perhaps both sides are losing a perspective of why we have a First Amendment. It's because the freedom to speak our minds is absolutely essential to a free society. Jefferson said, "Error of opinion may be tolerated where reason is free to combat it." Speech can be ugly, disgusting, hateful, prejudiced, and alarming, but it can never be dangerous to a free society as long as men and women of goodwill have the freedom of speech to dispute it, challenge it, and reject it. Suppressing speech, even the most hate-filled speech, doesn't diminish its influence, it strengthens it. I think Churchill made this point very clearly when he said, "It is the very conflict of spiritual and moral ideas which gives the free countries a great part of their strength." You see these dictators on their pedestals, surrounded by the bayonets of their soldiers and the truncheons of their police, yet in their hearts there is unspoken fear. They are afraid of words and thoughts. Words spoken abroad, thoughts stirring at home, all the more powerful because forbidden terrify them. A little mouse of thought enters the room and even the mightiest potentates are thrown into panic. And then he goes on to say, "A state of society where men may not speak their minds, where children denounce their parents to the police, where a businessman or small shopkeeper ruins his competitor by telling tales about his private opinions, such a state of society cannot long endure if brought into contact with the healthy outside world." Free societies don't punish words and thoughts, they punish deeds. And the reason for that is because words and thoughts can be countered by words and thoughts. That's why we have a First Amendment. And what we're seeing across the world today is that it is a very slippery slope between banning hate speech and banning speech we just hate. We've seen many examples even in our own country recently of legitimate speech being suppressed on college campuses, on social media platforms, and even in public discourse. You know, if there's an ideology that we don't like, the weakest thing that we can do is try to forbid it or suppress it. The strongest thing we can do is to use our own freedom of speech to confront it and defeat it on its merits. If we allow our society to become one where men and women may not speak their minds, as Churchill said, we'll have lost the very quality that he said gives free countries a great part of their strength. As Churchill said, these ideologies cannot long endure if brought into contact with the healthy outside world, but that in turn requires unrestricted freedom of speech, precisely the freedom that's protected by our First Amendment. Now, we've made very limited exceptions when speech becomes explicit incitement to do violence or to falsely defame an individual's reputation, but even in the case of defamation, the truth is always an absolute defense. What we're hearing now is something fundamentally different. It's to set up government or corporate officials to decide what speech is acceptable and what is not. And that is a very dangerous power that can quickly be abused. Today, a great deal of public discourse is conducted on social media. Major platforms like Google and Facebook that are here today, we've granted them legal immunity from the content of their platforms under the assumption that they're merely providing a public square and that those who use it should be held accountable for their own statements. This is appropriate as long as these platforms are not practicing any form of censorship or favoritism, other than, of course, censoring explicit incitement to violence. We're discovering, however, that they're indeed practicing censorship and political favoritism. This is their right as private corporations, but once they begin to practice censorship and political favoritism, they cease to be neutral platforms and instead become publishers who are responsible for their content and subject to action for incitement or defamation. So my question to the internet platforms represented here today is, I don't think you can be both. You can't be a neutral platform and at the same time exercising editorial control over content. So question very simply is, which are you? Are you a neutral forum or are you an editorial publication responsible for your content? Mr. Potts?